All right, well, thank you everybody for coming to this month's Power Platform Users Group. Excited to be presenting here. I'm Brent Mason, Director of Application Development here at SkyPoint Cloud. I'm going to be doing two different little mini presentations. One is going to be ensuring data quality collection using your offline Power App, and the other is how to provide a spreadsheet-like experience with quotes around the like for your Power App. So by way, there we go. By way of agenda, first I want to talk about what the challenge is around, collecting offline data in what I call a quality mode. Talk about some of our first of all, how do I define quality data? Because by definition, and I think a definition of somebody from a data warehouse may be quite different, but that's okay. And then what our lessons learned from a real world experience with some of our clients are. Talk about how I view the offline data pipeline. I do have a code demo that I'm going to go through a little bit. And then last but not least is a little snippet of code about how to add an ID to each of your mobile devices. So, because if you ever actually tried to read the device's mobile ID that actually comes with the device with Power App, not so easy. All right, so the challenge that we found in the real world is that, if you want to move data from your offline collection, right, which is the collection that's on your device, and you want to get it to your data source, you can simply use a command called collect from your online data source, referencing your offline collection, and it pushes all the data across. And this works super great when you're using a good online connection. When it doesn't work so good is when you have intermittent Wi-Fi. So in this case, if you're out in a warehouse someplace, out in the middle of a field, or in my example, I'm going to be using a hypothetical dairy, like we're milking the cows, and so not having that steady Wi-Fi connection can really be problematic if you're trying to upload a bunch of records, because you upload some of the records and some of them won't get uploaded. And then you get back in and maybe it tries to upload all the records, or maybe it thinks it uploaded all the records. So you end up with duplicate records and you end up with missing data. And I don't know about you, but that's not my version of a quality user experience for any of our clients or for the users that are actually having to collect that data and then try to explain why some of the data is missing and why some of it is in place. Right. And if you guys have any questions, pop them in the chat, and then one of the team here will interrupt me and I can answer some of those. All right, so here's how I define quality data. For example, today is 100% of the data collected is actually sent to our data source and received, right? Because just because you send it doesn't mean it necessarily got it. And just because you think you didn't send it doesn't mean it doesn't already have it in some cases. So no duplicate records and no missing data. That's what I'm defining as data quality. Some real world lessons learned. I just want to give you kind of these as an upfront going into the code demo, so that you can have some takeaway, and I'll try to address each of these as we go through the code demo. So added ID to each device using a GUID, and I'll show you some code at the end of this of how to do that. In part, why that's so important is because when you want to go back and you're looking at your data and your log files, you want to know which devices are sending data, which devices having problems, because you may need to go and clear your offline cache. And if there's your offline cache on the device, in the event that something's stuck in there, but knowing which device that data is coming from is super helpful. Second is keeping an event log. So when I try and send data or have problems sending data from the mobile device, I always like to make a note that, hey, I'm sending some data. And that way, if there's problems, I can go back and look and see, am I having particular problems with a particular device? Is there a problem with my code that my event log could identify and help me diagnose? Mentioned it previously, but a way to view and clear the device cached record. So I'll talk about this in the next bullet here, but when you are taking and you're collecting data from your offline device, your cell phone or tablet, you want to basically cache that into the device, into a collection, and then you want to regularly write that collection to your device storage memory. And if you get data in there and you can't get it out, for some reason, it can be problematic because it can be continuing to try to resend and resend and resend to your data source, which can clog up your event log with just noise, or could eventually, if you're not careful, send multiple records and things like that. So having a way to clear that is super important. Another lesson learned is don't have an online and offline mode. I've seen some examples where folks, they basically have the same form or two different forms, and one is used when they're online and one uses they're in an offline mode. My suggestion is when you collect the data, always write it to your data collection and then have your data pipeline actually send it from the data collection into the data source that you're trying to send it to. That eliminates a couple problems. One, if you have a problem, it's in the data pipeline, right? You don't know, did this come in offline mode? Did I collect this in online mode? And so that eliminates having two different code bases to try to debug and maintain. And last but not least is always save your online collections to your device storage, because you never know when something's going to happen to your application. The way Android and I think iPhone are both set up is if the operating system decides it ever needs memory, it can feel free at any time to clobber your application. No warnings, no event handlers to handle it, just is gone, right? So that if you're just storing all your data in memory and something happens, or maybe the device just loses power, battery runs out, the operator isn't paying attention, or maybe they drop it in a bucket of water or something like that, and has some challenges around that. But if it's located on your device storage, then when you power you back up the device or start the application again, you can actually take and read that back into memory, and then you're off to the races again.
Perfect. And I've seen Jeremy did post a question. Has the Power App developer user interface addressed the sudo save data error that always appears when running the app?
So yeah, you're talking about when you're running it in a browser, and so they do have an experimental feature, I believe, currently that allows you to pretend to have a cache in your online in your online application. And actually, he just posted it right there. It's good. Did I pass the test, Jeremy? Excellent. All right. All right, so wanted next to talk about the data pipeline as I define it for what we're going to do in the demo here. As I mentioned, always save data in the in-memory collection, even when the device is online. Okay, so that means when you do your submit form, don't submit your form directly to your data source. Submit it to the collection. And once you're in a situation where you're ready to try and push the data up to the data source, and I'll talk about that here in just a second, but first thing I always do is check and see if the data exists on the data source. So if I have a record of data, first thing I'm going to do is say, is that already in the data source? And I'm going to be using SharePoint as my data source today. So is my record already in SharePoint? If it doesn't exist there, then I'm going to write it using a patch. I send a single record at a time. And next I check and say, hey, is it really there? And if it is, then then and only then I will remove it from the offline collection, okay, which is your in-memory collection. That ensures that whatever you collect on the device gets sent to the SharePoint and doesn't have double records. So you don't have missing data and you don't have duplicate data. Let's see. Inside my code demo that I'm going to go through here in just a second, I didn't take the liberty of actually storing the data, as Jeremy mentioned in the chat here, to using save data and load data. I was just trying to keep it very simple and really be focused on the data pipeline. But you do want to make sure you include those features in what you guys do. All right, in the code demo, since we're using an online team session, I can't very well simulate or actually, go offline, otherwise we'll lose the video, my connection. And a couple of folks had messaged me after my last demo. I think the very first Power Platform Portland users group, I did a demo on how to actually implement saving offline data. And so they said, well, why don't you use you're using use the Teams client on your mobile device to, stream what you're doing. And the point again there is you have to take the mobile device into an offline mode, airport mode. It's going to be kind of hard to actually stream the data and simulate that you're offline. So those are my caveats for that. All right. Any questions before I jump into the code demo and talk about how we implemented what I just covered here? I don't see anything at
clear.
All right. Woo. All right, so I mentioned that my use case here is going to be we're a dairy, and every time the farmer or the dairyman milks the cow or the machine milks the cow, we're going to record how much milk the given cow had, and we're going to send it up to a SharePoint site. So I already have some data loaded here at the moment, but I'm actually going to go over to, let's see here. I'm actually going to wipe my data out of here. And I'm just showing this to see that I show you guys I do have some data in here, but we're going to start with a clean slate. Delete that. And I do have event logs, so I was using to test things yesterday, and I'm going to go ahead and clear out our event log also. All right. And I do have a cheat sheet or a little cheat screen here where I can go and actually my other app. Okay. So what I am going to do here is I am going to cheat. I'm going to, on the fly, implement a refresh icon. And for those of you who don't know how to implement refresh icons, you just pop an icon on the screen. Oops, and you grab it and you toss it somewhere out of the way. And you use this handy dandy called refresh. Type as usual. And what your data source is. So my data source is called offline dairy data. All right, and hold down the Alt key. We'll see if this works. And all right, there we go. Don't have any data in the SharePoint site. So let's see. The first thing I'm going to do is just demonstrate the app itself real quick. I'm going to take and I'm going to just I'm not going to update. This is actually triggered with now, but I do have I just use it as a SharePoint choices menu. I'm going to say Annabelle. She gave us 1 gallon of milk, and I click save data here, and it appears this is my in-memory collection, right? This is the actual data source here. And I'm going to say, all right, and Betsy gave 2 gallons of milk. And then I'm going to say, Fortune gave us 5 gallons of milk, which I don't know if that's possible for a cow, but I think that's up near the top end. All right, and then I'm going to click upload data, and this is actually going to trigger the function that pushes data out of the in-memory collection and into the SharePoint list using the data pipeline I talked about in the PowerPoint. Let's see if this works. And there it is. And you can saw literally after the data was up there, we cleared out the in-memory collection. All right, so let's take a moment and talk about what is actually happening here. By way of a couple things I did, just going to give you guys a couple hints here. When you first want to start having a form connecting to your offline data collection, you actually need to have the collection defined, otherwise it has some problems. So what I did is I took and initially I connected the form up to my SharePoint data source here. And if I refresh this, we should see some data there. There we go. And so I got all the fields in here, and then I created this little handy dandy cheat button, which said create my offline collection. And that simply has the command here. And I'm going to try zooming in here. Let's see if I can remember how to do this. Let's see if I do this here and I scroll over. No, let's see. My cursor, oops, going the wrong way. This is not going to be as easy as I hoped. All right, well, I'm going to click the button again. There we go. And simply, I'm just clearing the collection. I'm taking my online data source, which is my SharePoint list, and I'm just putting it into a collection called offline dairy data. And I did the same thing. There's another section where I actually collect the offline IDs, and we'll talk about the IDs in the GUID here in just a minute. But I basically created a single record, gave it a GUID, and I had to make a text because otherwise the system thinks the collection needs to have a GUID in it, and for other reasons I can talk about later, it's easier just to put this in as a text item. So now let's see if I can find my magnifier and turn it off. Go. And I guess just let me know if there's something on the screen that's hard to read. I have one of these high resolution monitors, and not everybody's monitor gets as good a resolution as this. So I want to make sure everything I'm giving is readable. And then I also provided a quick button to clear my offline collection in case I needed to clear that out, as well as to clear my collection of temporary IDs if I need to. Okay, so you notice right now on the background, this says this form isn't collected in the data, connected to data, but it is actually connected to the collection of offline dairy data. And so I simply have 4 different fields here: the milking date and time, the cow with the drop-down that you guys saw, a text box where I can enter in anything I want, but in this case, it needs to be a number. I didn't do a bunch of data validation here. And then I have a temporary ID, which is a GUID that I assign at the time the record is saved. And looking at the data for the GUID, it's going to show you guys here. And this is where, I know this is readable over here. I'm not going to play with the magnifying glass. So if somebody puts their hand up and says it's not readable, let me know, and I'll be happy to zoom in on this. But I do have this toggle here for demonstration purposes, which allows me to switch from data edit mode to edit something that's in the gallery as opposed to collecting new data. And so that's where this default stuff comes in. But I did change my code basically to say, I'll format the text, make it a little bit nicer. If I'm in edit mode, give me the data that's in the SharePoint, or save the data that's actually in the form. Otherwise, give me a brand new GUID. So we'll use that to save the data. Okay. And literally the save data button, it does one simple thing. It submits the cow form data, right? And this is the cow form data, by the way, just to be clear here, this little section on the right, or left, sorry, my other right. And then it turns it back into new mode, basically clears the form so I can enter our next set of data. So this part, the data input form, the hardest part to think about when you create this is when you create it initially using your online data source. So initially it was pointed to this offline dairy demo data list. Once I did that, I got the form created. I created this little handy dandy button, as I mentioned already, that creates my offline collection. And then all I had to do is change the data source for the form to be collecting the offline, using the offline data dairy collection. All right, so I'm going to I'm going to put another record into the in-memory collection just so we can have fun. This is going to be Sue, and Sue gave us 1 gallon of milk. And the key thing to recognize here, so here is the date and time, which is the moment I pressed that button, which was now, the quantity, the cow, and then this is the GUID, which you can't see the whole thing, but most GUIDs are unique in the first 3 characters, so you can tell which one you're looking at. So you can see we have a unique identifier for that. So let's see here. So another thing so I created a field inside of the SharePoint site and the SharePoint list called temporary ID, which has the GUID in it. And this is required to be a unique field. So when I set up the list, I made sure this is unique. So a couple of reasons for that. One, if for some reason my app does mess up and it doesn't validate that the data is or isn't here, and I try to upload a duplicate record, it won't upload the duplicate because it has the temporary ID here, and that one's already used. So Jeremy asked the question, let's see, this is all for new data. Have you done any exploration of modifying existing records while offline? For the most part, no. I'm going to show you an example of, I'm going to take a record that's online and try to modify it while it's offline and upload it back up to show you that, I can't do that. But in modifying existing records in an offline mode can cause synchronization problems, because if you're offline, you have a collection and you modify the data offline, when you try to push it back up, you may overwrite some data that somebody else wrote. So there are synchronization things that come into play. And not to say it can't be solved, but it's not as simple as the small bread box. So does that answer your question, Jeremy?
Yes.
Cool. All right. So really all the magic happens in the upload data section here. This is going to get a little bit deep, so I'm going to try to break it down section by section. If we look at it, from a module perspective, it's not as hard to understand, in my opinion. You may disagree with me, but it is a fair amount of code. So I'm just going to quickly scroll down this, right? So it's about 2.5 pages of code. And I'll look through that. So if anybody has trouble reading this again, let me know and I'll zoom in and pick your parts of the code. I'll be happy to share this code in the appropriate forum. So if anybody wants to take a look at this so they can copy that, feel free. This is not proprietary information. And the other thing I would mention is there are some steps that I go through to do this, which I'll kind of talk about as I break it down. But one of the things that I recommend doing when you're writing complicated code like this is take a chunk of code and copy it off to a button. And so that you kind of have one chunk of code and have 2 or 3 buttons. Say, here's step 1, step 2, step 3. And execute step 1, validate it works. Then do step 2, validate it works. Then do step 3 and validate it works, and so on. Because one, that makes writing each little code chunk easier, and then you can debug it easier rather than writing this big monolith of code and then trying to figure out, oh my gosh, how do I actually go through and debug all this? All right, so the first thing I do is I have a collection of data to be saved. And so I have my in-memory collection right here. And basically, I make a copy of this in-memory collection. And there's a reason I do that, because when we get to the end, data that was successfully uploaded, we remove from this in-memory collection. Things that weren't successfully uploaded and verified stay in the in-memory collection. So I make a copy of that. I also make a copy of all the different unique IDs, the GUIDs that I captured, and create a separate collection for those. And then I actually clear that out right after I do that, basically so I have an empty collection. All right, so the first step is right here. And the first step is, oops, and it's going to be hard for me to do this without scrolling up and down wildly, so I will do my best. My first step is to say, is this data already in SharePoint? So I'm going to upload one record at a time. So the first thing I do here is I say, I'm going to look up from my online collection. I say offline dairy demo, right? I probably said online dairy demo or dairy data. But so I take the GUID and I say, in my in-memory collection, I'm iterating through, once again, and I'll actually I'll put 2 records in here just to make it so we're iterating through something that's more than 1 record. There we go. Okay, so now we've got two records in there. So this is the chunk of code again that we're looking at here. The first thing I say is I look up and say, can I find this temporary ID in the SharePoint list? Okay, if my result is blank, I know the data hasn't been saved yet, right? Because it's not there. So I just simply have a standard patch command that patches the data to my offline dairy demo list. And I think if any of you guys don't know how the patch works, hit me up after the class, or go ahead and just do a quick Google search on Power Apps patch command, and you can figure that out. Not too hard, but I upload the data there. Otherwise, and this is the else portion of the command, if the data is already up there, I do take and I send a little notification to the user saying, hey, we've already attempted to upload this data. Here's the GUID I tried to upload. And then I take and I patch to my offline demo event log, and this log is empty at the moment because I cleared that out. But I patched the fact that, hey, we tried to upload this data and it was already there. Because that's the indication there may be something wrong with the code. It may be totally legit that there was a data connectivity issue and something happened and didn't get pushed up there. So that's really the first step. Is the record there? If it is not, uploaded. Otherwise, it's just log a warning. All right, so second step on this is verify the record is in the data source. All right, so I basically repeat this exact same lookup, and I take the, so once again, either it's up there or I've tried to upload it, right? And so I look again and I say, all right, look up, is the data there? Is the GUID there? And if it is, okay, actually, if it's not, then I say, all right, we had a problem, because I should get a result back here because I just uploaded that data in theory. And if I didn't, then I'm going to notify the user saying, hey, we failed to upload this, and I'm going to try and patch and say, hey, we failed to save this information. And lastly, so this is the data didn't make it up there. And then this section here is data did make it up here. So in this case, I'm actually going to patch my GUID into my collection called Save Temporary ID. So this basically said, hey, you save this data, and we verified that it was up there and it's all good. So I'm making basically, I'm iterating through my list of data, pushing it up there one at a time, verifying it's there. And then once I verified it's there, I'm making a record internally on the device saying, hey, the data is here. I iterate through my collection using the for all. I probably didn't mention it first. I'm using a for all. And that's really the only good way, or the only way to loop in a Power App currently. And so I'm going through this loop, verifying this stuff. Once I've completed that, and I believe all the data is uploaded, or I've at least tried to upload it once, then I basically say, all right, I'm going to, for every record in my saved list of temporary GUIDs, I'm going back to my offline collection, and this is of my IDs, and I'm removing it from my offline collection. And I'm also removing it from the offline collection of offline dairy data. So another way to say this is, if I verified that the data is here, I'm going to pull it out of the collection. I should see it over here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit this upload data button. And you should see, once again, these two records disappear off the left-hand side. And then right after those both are loaded in there, it's going to verify they're there. And then it's going to, at the end, it's going to pull them off this list. So I'm going to click this, and with any luck, I'm going to see there they are, and they pulled off. And it's actually nice. I didn't put any delays in, but you can kind of see how they both got up there, and then they got both removed. Now, I can't, as well as I would like to, do a demo where I actually pull the plug on the network connection, or turn it into airport mode when I'm actually uploading the data. So I'm going to do the best thing I can to provide an example of something like that, but I'll try to upload the same GUID twice, and we'll see if this works. I'm going to drink the water here. All right. So I'm going to put one new record in here. So I'm going to say, let's see, Annabelle. And I'm going to go, and I'm not going to change this. This is always just going to be now. I could change this if I wanted to, but we're just going to make things easy. So Annabelle uploaded 2 gallons today at this particular milking. And now I'm going to do my handy dandy cheat button. And I'm going to say, I'm going to look at Fortune, right? And I'm going to try to upload this record twice. So I'm going to click this button, and you notice it uploaded the same record with the same GUID, D, whatever this is, and same thing right here. So and I'm going to try to upload Sue's data also twice. So now we have 3 records. 2 of them are good. One of them is bad. And so we should see Annabelle's 2-gallon record pop up here once I click the upload data. So I'm going to do this, and hopefully we'll see some warnings come across the top. All right, so you see we attempted to upload some data there. We do not have 2 records from Betsy with the same GUID, right? We have Betsy here with 85 and 89. We have Annabelle with C102 in there. So I think that worked. I didn't pay attention to how many records we have. I'm going to even try it one more time just to be sure. So I'm going to take Annabelle's 2-gallon record and add it in there. And then we're going to do one new record. Just, whoops. Now I put it in there twice. Well, it doesn't hurt, right? And I'm going to say Fortune has uploaded another 5. All right, so we should see one new record. And this is the number here under the bold is the record number. So we should see 19. We should see 19, right? Because these Annabelle records 778, 778 are already there. All right, so click on this button here. And hopefully we only see one new record. All right, excellent. And it's hidden beneath this button. I put the button across here to kind of, I wanted to have it be an arrow, but couldn't get a good arrow for the icon. So just went with that. So if I could look at my offline event record here and refresh that, if things went properly, there we see some warnings where I tried to upload the duplicate data, and you can see where we tried to do that. So there's an example of if you started seeing lots of these come in as you are, you actually using the app out in the field, you might say, maybe I should go find out what device ID this particular one is, right? And this happens to be my browser ID this time. And, make some decisions. Do I need to clear the cache? Is there a problem with my code? What might be happening around that? Let's see. And the other thing I was going to show you. So I guess any questions on that? I know that, it's hard when I talk fast and we talk about in-memory collections, offline collections, saving the data, putting up in the SharePoint list, but did that conceptually make sense what we talked about and how I constructed that?
Yeah, it did. Can you go back to your for all loop?
Sure. It begins right here. Yep.
Yeah, so you check if it's there by if you look up. Okay.
Yeah. So I do a lookup.
That ID. You just look up on that ID. So you could add any sort of check you want there. You're just using the temp ID. Okay.
Yeah, and the reason to use a GUID, okay, is because the device, when you're putting stuff into the device, it has no idea what the record ID is going to be on SharePoint, or if you're using SQL or any of those kind of, it has no idea. And particularly if you're uploading, let's just say that you're uploading other associated data in a different table, a different list. Yeah. When you get the data uploaded, you need a way to put the data together. And your temporary, your GUID is the way to take and associate multiple tables of data together on the back. And the way we've done that for our clients is we actually have a Power Automate flow that runs about 60 seconds after we've uploaded all the data. And then it will actually find the temporary IDs, and then in the child tables, it will actually put the actual record ID for the parent record. And that way you can have relational integrity as you're doing your stuff.
That's what you're saying.
All right. Yeah, let's see here. So my bonus offer, right? I promised you guys I was going to show you how to put a record or device ID onto your device, since that Power App doesn't offer native functionality for that. And here is the code to do that. So just basically, it's 3 simple lines of code. And I did saving this actually on the device here. But first thing is you try to load, in this case, our file is called device ID. So we tried to load that into a collection. And we basically, hey, if this collection ID or collection is empty, all right, then we know that particular device didn't have an identifier on it. So we clear collect into a collection called collection device ID, and a single record called GUID, right? So this puts a unique identifier on there, and then we save this collection to the device's storage. So that way, when the device is powered off, powered on, next time you load and begin running that application on the device, it's going to pick up that exact same GUID. Is going to say, all right, next time it's going to say, oh, my collection is not empty. I don't need to assign a device ID. And then it always saves it back the same collection you have, just to make sure it keeps it in sync with everything. And that is how you'd add a unique identifier to each device. Things that will destroy this device. So in my in-memory browser, unless I actually have the functionality enabled to save offline data, as soon as I start a new browser session, it's going to have a new device ID. If on your mobile phone or your tablet, you take and you uninstall the Power App and you reinstall it, or particularly if you do the Power App client that you download from the App Store or Google Play, that will clear out that device information on the storage of that device. And next time you run that application, it will actually put a new GUID up here. So, but other than that, that's a good way to keep your devices straight. And that way, when you upload your data to your SharePoint site, you can actually see, like, hey, which device did it come from? You can see your error logs and things like that.
What kind of delegation limits on those 2 functions, load data, save data?
Since you're sending it to in-memory, I don't believe there are any delegation limits. Delegation limits are usually when you're going to an online data source like SharePoint or Azure SQL. So I haven't seen any issues with that, although I haven't quickly tried to stress test that. Okay. And I do know that there are no delegation limits when you're filtering collections. So at some point, your device is going to fill up with records, right? And you're going to run out of memory, and then who knows how the operating system's going to handle that. I can't say,
performance concern, right?
Yeah, performance is always a concern, but my personal experience has been I've never had a mobile device that I felt had a poor user experience using using a Power App. Now, certainly I've had other applications from non-Power Apps that I had performance issues with. So Ted in the the chat asked, what is delegation in terms of Power Apps? So since Power Apps is a online application, and it's actually running in the cloud, except for when it's running offline on a mobile device. Microsoft, in their wisdom, for whatever reason, decided they didn't want to have more than 2,000 records up. And by default, it's 500. You can bump it up to 2,000 while you go into your application settings, but it will not return more than 2,000 records from the data source to the Power App in one chunk. Right? There are techniques for you. If you had 10,000 records, you could do 5 chunks, and you could bring in 5 different sets of data. But let's just say, if you had 10,000 boxes or cases of apples in your warehouse, and you said, send me a record of all the red apples in your warehouse, and 8,000 of those cases were red, you would only get 2,000 records back. And there's other things where the filter commands you can actually select use to get a limited set of data back. If the query that the filter command uses is not properly formed, or the data source you're hitting against does not support the type of filtering you're trying to do, it will actually send individual records to the device to be run through the filter command, and limits those to 2,000. It's a way to, so you don't actually send 10,000 records. So it's a way to do throttling, if you want to look at it that way, certainly. Let's just imagine if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you don't run a query, and and then you have to actually send 1 million rows over the wire to your mobile device, or even if you're trying to do that all in the cloud, and imagine all the resources Microsoft have to spin up to make that happen. All right, so I guess any questions on the demo we've done so far before I move into my next one, talking about providing a spreadsheet-like experience, which is a little less complicated and not as long. There's Fernando, yay. All right, so I'm going to go slip on over to the other PowerPoint here and talk about bringing people and data. Oops, that's my Q&A. Sorry, that's the last slide there, and we'll scroll over here. Oops, it's so small there. All right, so spreadsheet-like experiences using a Power App. And I want to be clear that this isn't going to be about how to do formulas and all sorts of crazy stuff, just like you would in Excel. It's to provide how to provide a good UI experience. And actually, I probably could even just go here and edit this right now. UI experience in that. So first, I wanted to talk about what the challenge is, what the solutions are, some of the downsides, and then do a quick code demo along with some Q&A on that. All right, so what's the challenge? For those of you who have tried to use and edit data inside of a gallery, inside of a Power App, particularly when you're connected directly to SharePoint, when you try to tab from element to element, particularly if you change something in the data, it can lose focus, and it is a very user disruptive experience. So the user flow, they can't keep their flow going when they're doing that. No pun intended for the Power Automate fans. But yes, they can't tab quickly from element to element like they can in a traditional spreadsheet. And so in my quick little code demo, I'm going to show you an easy way to give a better experience to the user. And just give you the what they call the spoiler. What I do is read the data source that we're trying to edit into a collection, and then connect the gallery to the collection. And then I use patch to update the individual fields directly back to the SharePoint list. And so it's and some of you probably have used galleries before. You know about patching out of a gallery directly into a data source. If you don't, we'll cover that here. The downsides of doing this particular method. It causes issues if multiple users are trying to edit the same row of data at the same time. So if we read a row of cache data into our collection, or the data in the collection is cached. Somebody changes the record online. You take and change a cell in the gallery, it's going to patch it to the online source, and whoever wrote data last wins. So that's one of the challenges around this. Our use cases have, real world use cases have been things like quote calculator, where you have a single sales rep working on a quote for a customer. That works really good for that. We've had, if people are doing editing data kind of in a row like for a form, but they're the only user of the data, that also works really well for that. And let's see, yeah, so works best when the use case doesn't need to support concurrent editing of the same record. Let's see here. So I'm going to do a quick demonstration when it's corrected directly to, and I'm going to put SharePoint list. All right, and then I'm going to review the code of when using it using a collection-based approach. I'm going to stop sharing here while I pick and flip over on the Power App side of things to my other app. So bear with me for just a second. Let me get that going. Okay. And for purposes of this demonstration, if you have any questions on the YouTube video later, I have a collection that I had created of dairy data from collecting cow milking records. And so this is the collection of data that we're going to take and use in our demo for the spreadsheet-like experience. So here you can see a gallery full of records, and these are the records that we had showing in the SharePoint site right here. So 14 through 20. And I'm going to hit the play button here, and I'm going to see if you guys can notice what happens. So if I'm right here, right, and I'm going to go ahead and say bossy, and I do tab, right, I'm going to, you couldn't really see it there. I'm going to say 6, right, I'm going to tab this out. Notice, I don't know if you caught it right, but I had I tabbed my focus over to the milking data, and now my focus is gone, right? I'm going to go to here to this particular record. I'm going to change this to 8. I'm going to hit tab, right? So I should be over here. Right, go 8, tab, and now notice suddenly I've lost my place again. So now I'm tabbing, it just starts, it's not going random, but it starts, it went up here for some reason, doesn't want to go over to where the cows are. Tab order is a super important thing to make sure you're keeping track of when you're doing trying to use a spreadsheet-like experience in the gallery. So that's the challenge we're trying to solve. I'm just going to show you again one more time. So I'm down here, editing Betsy's record. I'll say we have a 7. And I'll tab, which when we should have the cursor over here, right? And suddenly cursor's not there, right? We don't have there. But if I click here, and I tab through these without changing anything, you notice it stays there and doesn't have any issues with that. So what is the secret sauce to fixing this? This is our solution screen here. So now I've got the exact same gallery with the updated data we have. I got a refresh button in case you need to have that. And to be really clear on my on visible event for this page, this screen, I have a really simple command. So where's on visible? Whoops, I got the gallery corrected, not my screen. All right, now my screen's selected. On visible, and it's simply one line. I simply collect my offline dairy demo data list into my collection cow data. And you could, if we wanted to do like a quote and you had a whole bunch of quotes in the system, you could definitely do a filter. So if I wanted to, I could filter it and say, just give me Bossy's or Betsy's or Annabelle's data. In this case, since I want a lot of records here, I just, grab the whole thing. All right. So now I want you guys to notice here, when I go ahead and I'm going to change, we'll change this to Sue. Right, and I tab, notice I'm going to 8, 9, right? If I go to, I'm gonna change this to a 1, tab, notice all my tabs are working good. And just to, I'm gonna change all my quantities to a 1. Notice now, and unlike a spreadsheet, my up and down arrows don't move me up and down. So really you're just limited to tabbing. But most people, a lot of people when they're doing data entry, doing tabbing, it's just fine. Now if I go to here, I'm going to take and look at my offline data. I'm going to quickly do a refresh on this. Oops, actually did it on its own, didn't even have to click it. Now notice all these say 1, so you can see the data is coming out of the form into the list. Yeah, I am talking about a desktop app. Well, if you were on a tablet, right, and you were hitting the tab button, let's say you had an external keyboard, you would still have the same challenge. But obviously in a tablet environment, right, you're using your finger or something to click from cell to cell, so you wouldn't necessarily see that same challenge. But I would say, I'm going to go back to the original challenge screen here, that when you do change any element like 3, right, and as soon as you move off, right, it still loses focus. So it's not going to be as impactful on a tablet or a phone. All right, so some of the key things on here I showed you, and you could, it could be any number of events where you gather data from your list and put it into your collection. I just happened to choose the on visible because that was, I knew when I flipped to the screen, it would refreshed up for me there. So again, I have my items in my gallery hooked up to my collection, my cow data collection. And quickly looking at a very simple patch command, go to my advanced tab and on change. So the on change event here, I'm going to format my text here, make it a little more readable. But it basically says when the data in this cell changes, my data source, offline dairy demo data, this item, right, that is the item that's currently being edited, the record in the gallery, and I update the quantity. And I grab since this is numeric data is required in the SharePoint list, I take the value of the text box. Some of the other things are a little more complicated. If you look at the patch command of the combo box, once again, patching it this item, cow ID. In this case, since it's a combo box, it could be multiple selected items. There aren't. In this particular case, I limited it to only one, but I grabbed the first record of the table there that has the selected items in it. Patch that in there. Similar type thing with the actual date. Once again, grab the selected date, selected milking date, and put it into milking date. Last but not least, the GUID, is just the same, very similar thing as we saw in with the gallon scale, the milk quantity. So in this case, it's a text field or text. So I just grab the text and stuff it into the temporary ID.
What happens if you want to create a new item from like this screen right here?
Oh, well, that's a great question, Jeremy, and I'll pay you afterwards for teeing that up for me. So that's where we got those little tiny plus button. And so all I do there when I hit the plus, and that's selected, I do two things. I patch the offline data source. In this case, I could potentially patch an entirely blank record in there, but in this case, I've just put the milking date of today in there to have some kind of data in there. And then I immediately reload my offline collection, or my collection. In this case, it's not offline, from my data source. Right. So when I hit this plus button, you're going to see, I'll run it here, but when I hit the plus button, right, in a couple seconds there, boom, there's my blank record. And I can say fortune, give me 12. Well, I can't do 12. I limited my gallons of milk to less than 10 because I don't know about you, but I've never heard a cow that gives more than 5 gallons of milk. But I'll put 5 in here and tab out of there. And Fernando had a question here. So I'm patching the data source at each tab. Would I recommend saving the patch until the user finishes their changes and pushes the save button? Certainly, you can put a save button on there. Fernando, no, I'm not patching to the collection. I'm patching directly back to the data source. Okay, and that's one of the things. So if you patch to the collection, you get the same behavior as you get if you were as we had when we were looking at the challenge screen. Right, the exact same behavior. So the key thing is having the gallery looking at a different data source than you're patching to. Performance-wise, I guess it all depends on, using patching individual fields. If you're having a whole bunch of people that are, if there's 100 users or 1,000 users using the app, maybe performance would be a consideration. In our case, most of the companies we work with, they have, I'm thinking of for the quoting application, they had, I think, 20 different salespeople. And so the odds of 20 salespeople all hitting the save button, or not save, but patching data back at the exact same time, because these are people that went on the road, hopped on an airplane and went to some remote site or remote city. The odds of them actually all trying to quote at the exact same time was very minimal. So performance was never anything that became an issue. But yeah, but if I had 100 people that were literally, or 1,000 people that are all using the app at the same time, it might be a consideration. I would have to, kind of judge that. I would, it all depends on the experience you want to give the user, right? If, if you didn't, if you wanted to have the save button, you really wouldn't need to use this technique, right? Because you would have already updated all the data and you would hit the save, right? And you could have written the entire record back. With one single patch, and then losing focus wouldn't have been an issue because you would have actually clicked the save button. All right, and anyway, so I think I reviewed the code here with the plus button, and then the code for deleting is super simple. All right, in this case, I do remove it from the collection, but first thing I do is I remove it from the just remove if statement from the SharePoint list, and I basically say, all right, get the ID of the item I'm looking at here. In this case, I exposed the ID field right here, so you can see ID was 14. And I remove it from the SharePoint list, and then I remove it from the collection. If I don't remove it from the collection, the row still sits here, and it looks like it belongs to the collection still, and you can still edit it. But when in fact it would be gone when you tried to actually patch back to the collection, that record wouldn't be there, and it would throw an error for you. So, just giving as an example, hit the row 16, we're going to remove 16. All right, and 16 is gone, and I'll go over here and I'll be patient for a couple seconds. There we go. And I didn't refresh anything. SharePoint did that automatically. Record 16 is gone from there. Now, obviously, I think in a production app, I would have had a dialog box come up to say, are you sure you want to delete this? But since we're just doing a quick demo to keep the code simple, I didn't put that in there. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and delete this record here, and away it goes. Super simple like that. And again, looking online, in a couple seconds, this record here should disappear. If it doesn't, I'll do a refresh there, all on its own. Okay, so that is really the crux of doing a more of a user or a spreadsheet-like user experience. Once again, just taking and showing here, we can just I took Bossy out. We'll put Bossy back. I'm just tabbing, right? We can just tab all the way through here, and have a fun experience with that. All right, and just for reference, I did put a refresh button up here in case I got stuck and something didn't work like I wanted to, and all the refresh button was just reload the collection again. But as we noted, didn't have to use that, so it was exciting.